The maintenance bay of Nexus Point hummed with the constant thrum of recycling systems and atmospheric processors. Zara Velferi pressed herself deeper into the narrow space between two massive conduit arrays, her violet skin almost glowing under the harsh industrial lighting. She cursed softly in her native tongue as another diagnostic failed to complete properly. 3 cycles. 3 cycles she'd been trying to isolate the power fluctuations in Sector 7, and still the problem eluded her. Her luminescent markings, intricate silver patterns that spiraled across her arms and face like living tattoos, pulsed with frustrated energy. Among her people, the Zarathi, such vibrant displays of emotion were considered deeply inappropriate. A proper Zarathi maintained neutral gray skin tones, with markings that remained steady and dim. But Zara had never been proper by her people's standards. Just focus, she whispered to herself, recalibrating her scanner for the dozenth time. The power coupling has to be the issue. It has to be. The truth was, she could have requested assistance from one of the human engineers hours ago. The maintenance staff at Nexus Point had always been professional, if distant, in their interactions with her. But Zara had learned long ago that drawing attention to herself only led to disappointment and judgment. Better to work alone, in the shadows, where her defective appearance couldn't embarrass anyone. The sound of footsteps echoed through the bay, accompanied by someone humming an unfamiliar melody. Zara's markings flashed bright silver in alarm. The sector was supposed to be restricted during her diagnostic work. She quickly dimmed them, willing her skin to fade to a more acceptable pale lavender, and pressed herself further into the shadows. "Damn universal translators acting up again," a male voice muttered, followed by the distinctive clink of tools being set down. "Third time this month. At this rate, I'll be speaking in hand gestures to half the station." The voice was warm, tinged with an accent Zara recognized as from Earth's western continents. She held her breath, hoping whoever it was would complete their work quickly and leave. Through a gap in the conduits, she could see a human male, tall and lean, with sandy brown hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it. His coveralls bore the insignia of a maintenance specialist. Marcus Reed, she'd seen his name on work orders, though they'd never met face to face. The humans all tended to blur together in her mind, their similar pale coloring and lack of distinctive markings making them difficult for her to distinguish. But something about his relaxed posture and the gentle way he handled his equipment marked him as different from the usual hurried technicians. "Where did I put that damn coupler?" Marcus continued his one-sided conversation while rummaging through his toolkit. "Could have sworn I..." His words cut off as a shower of sparks erupted from the conduit directly above Zara's hiding spot. She yelped in surprise, jerking backward and directly into a secondary power coupling. The impact sent a cascade of loose components clattering to the floor, and suddenly the narrow space that had hidden her became a trap as she found herself wedged between two pieces of equipment. "Hey! You okay in there?" Marcus's voice was immediately concerned, and she could hear him moving in her direction. "I'm fine," Zara called out quickly, struggling to free herself without causing more damage. "Please, just continue your work. I'll be out of your way in a moment. Hang on, let me help you." The sound of his footsteps grew closer. These maintenance spaces can be tricky. I got stuck in one myself last week and had to, oh. Zara had finally managed to extract herself from the tangle of equipment, but in doing so, she'd stepped directly into the main lighting array. Her violet skin seemed to glow like polished amethyst under the bright illumination, and her silver markings, responding to her embarrassment and fear, blazed with brilliant light across her face and arms. She stood frozen, waiting for the familiar look of distaste or, worse, pity that she was accustomed to receiving. Instead, Marcus simply stared at her with what could only be described as wonder. "Wow," he said softly, his voice holding none of the disgust she expected. That's actually incredible. Are those markings some kind of bioelectrical display?" Zara blinked in surprise, her markings flickering with confusion. Yes. They respond to emotional and physical states. It's considered a genetic defect among my people." She looked down at her feet, her skin beginning to fade back toward gray. I apologize for the unsightly display. Unsightly? Marcus moved closer, his expression genuinely puzzled. Are you kidding? That's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. It's like you have your own personal aurora. The words hit Zara like a physical blow. Beautiful. No one had ever used that word to describe her markings before. Her own family had spent her childhood trying various treatments to suppress them. Her few potential suitors had made it clear that they would expect her to undergo genetic modification before any formal bonding could take place. Her markings flared bright silver again, this time with something that felt dangerously close to hope. You're not disturbed by them? She asked hesitantly. Marcus shook his head emphatically. Disturbed? Lady, where I come from, people pay serious money to get light displays half as impressive as what you've got naturally. He gestured to her arms where the patterns were still glowing softly. How do they work? Are they tied to your nervous system, or is it more of a hormonal response? The genuine scientific curiosity in his voice was something Zara had rarely encountered. Most beings who bothered to ask about her condition did so with the clinical detachment of someone examining a specimen. But Marcus's interest felt different, personal and respectful. It's neurochemical, she found herself explaining, her markings settling into a gentle pulse that she realized was reflecting contentment. The patterns correspond to different emotional and physiological states. Among my people, the ability to control them completely is considered a mark of maturity and social fitness. That sounds like a terrible waste, Marcus replied, leaning against a nearby workstation. I mean, you've basically got a built-in mood ring that happens to be gorgeous. Why would anyone want to suppress that? Zara felt her world shift slightly on its axis. In less than 5 minutes, this human stranger had managed to reframe her greatest source of shame as something worthy of appreciation. It was disorienting and wonderful and terrifying all at once. I should go, she said suddenly, taking a step toward the exit. I've interrupted your work long enough. Actually, Marcus said, holding up the component he'd been searching for, I think you might have saved me some time. I was looking for a faulty power coupling, and judging by those sparks that scared you out of hiding, I'm betting it's in that conduit you were working on. Zara paused, looking back at him. You were here for the Sector 7 power fluctuations. Guilty as charged. Been chasing phantom readings all week. He grinned, and Zara found herself momentarily distracted by the warmth in his expression. I don't suppose you'd be willing to share your findings. Professional courtesy between engineers. It was a simple request, but to Zara it felt like an invitation into a world where her knowledge mattered more than her appearance. Where her skills could earn respect instead of her differences earning scorn. The coupling is definitely compromised, she said, moving back toward the conduit array. But the real issue is a harmonic resonance in the primary distribution matrix. See, when the coupling fluctuates, it creates a feedback loop that. As she launched into her explanation, her markings settled into a steady, gentle glow that reflected her professional confidence. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Zara felt like she was exactly where she belonged. And judging by the attentive way Marcus listened to her every word, perhaps she wasn't the only one feeling that way. The library aboard Nexus Point was one of the few truly quiet spaces on the station. Tucked away in the civilian sector, it served as a repository for cultural archives, research materials, and the personal collections donated by various species over the decades. The soft blue lighting was designed to be comfortable for most known sentient species, and the soundproofing made it a perfect refuge from the constant hum of station life. Neera Ashworth had discovered this sanctuary during her first week aboard the station 3 months ago. As a linguistics researcher specializing in interspecies communication patterns, she appreciated the vast collection of linguistic databases and cultural texts. But more than that, she valued the solitude. After spending her days facilitating translation protocols and mediating communication breakdowns between species, the library's peaceful atmosphere was exactly what she needed to recharge. She was deep in a comparative analysis of Valdorian syntax structures when she noticed she wasn't alone anymore. At a table near the back of the main reading area sat a figure she'd never seen before. He was tall, even-seated, with the distinctive crystalline features of a Valdorian, angular cheekbones that caught the light like cut gemstones, pale translucent skin with a faint blue undertone, and silver hair that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. But something about his posture set him apart from other Valdorians she'd encountered. Where they typically sat with rigid, formal bearing, this one was hunched slightly over his tablet, his expression unguarded and almost melancholy. Nira tried to return her attention to her work, but found herself glancing back at the solitary figure. Valdorians were known for their emotional restraint and logical thinking processes. They rarely showed distress so openly, and they certainly didn't spend time in libraries reading what appeared to be recreational materials. When she looked up again 20 minutes later, she was startled to find him watching her. "I apologize," he said, his voice carrying the characteristic melodic quality of his species but with a warmth she hadn't expected. "I didn't mean to stare. It's just rare to see someone so absorbed in Valdorian linguistic patterns. Most beings find our language structure challenging." Nira felt her cheeks warm slightly. "Oh, no need to apologize. I'm a linguistics researcher, occupational hazard, I'm afraid. I find the mathematical precision of Valdorian communication fascinating. The way emotional context is embedded in grammatical structure is brilliant." The Valdorian's expression shifted, and for a moment Nira caught what looked like surprise before his features settled back into a neutral mask. "You speak of our emotional encoding as if it were a positive trait. Most species view it as a limitation." "A limitation?" Nira set down her tablet and turned to face him more fully. "If anything, I'd say it's an evolutionary advantage. The ability to communicate precise emotional states through syntax alone eliminates so much potential for misunderstanding. Unless one struggles with the expected emotional parameters," the Valdorian replied quietly, then seemed to catch himself. "Forgive me. I'm Kex Thorne. I should have introduced myself properly." "Nira Ashworth," she responded, noting the slight tremor in his voice when he'd mentioned emotional parameters. "And please, don't apologize for sharing your thoughts. I find different perspectives invaluable in my work." Kex nodded, but she noticed he didn't quite meet her eyes. "Your work must bring you into contact with many species. Do you find that most beings are accepting of differences in emotional expression?" The question seemed loaded with more than casual curiosity. Nira considered her answer carefully. "I think most beings are more alike than they realize. We all want to be understood, to feel connected to others. The specific ways we express that might vary, but the underlying need is universal. Even when those expressions don't match what's considered normal for one species." Kex asked, his crystalline features reflecting the library's soft lighting. "Especially then," Nira said firmly. "In my experience, beings who don't fit their species' standard patterns often have the most interesting perspectives to offer." Something in Kex's posture relaxed slightly. "That's not a common viewpoint among my people. What's considered normal among Valdorians?" Nira asked gently, sensing she was approaching sensitive territory. Kex was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the table's surface. "Emotional equilibrium. Logical response patterns. The ability to suppress personal feelings in favor of collective harmony." He looked up at her finally. "I've never been particularly good at any of those things. And that's seen as a problem. Among my people, excessive emotional expression is considered a disorder. Something to be corrected through meditation and pharmaceutical intervention." His voice carried a bitterness that made Nira's heart ache. "I was advised to seek treatment before I embarrassed my family line further. So you came here instead?" "I came here to work as a cultural liaison, yes. But also because continuing to fail at being a proper Valdorian was becoming exhausting." The pain in his admission was clear, and Nira felt a strong urge to reach out to him. Instead, she kept her voice gentle. "Can I ask what kind of emotional expression got you labeled as disordered?" Kex's laugh was hollow. Compassion, mainly. Empathy for beings outside my immediate social circle. I have this inconvenient tendency to actually care about others' well-being, even when it's not logical or beneficial to do so. He met her eyes. I assume that sounds ridiculous to you. It sounds human, Neera replied without thinking, then quickly added, I mean, it sounds like qualities that humans value highly. Compassion and empathy are considered virtues in my culture. Really? Kex leaned forward slightly, his expression brightening. Your people don't view emotional investment as a weakness. Some do, I suppose. But generally, no. We tend to think that caring about others is what makes us, well, human. She paused. Though I have to admit, I sometimes struggle with feeling like I don't fit in either. You? Kex looked genuinely surprised. But you seem so confident, so comfortable with yourself. Neera laughed, a sound that held more irony than humor. I spend my days helping others communicate, but I've never been particularly good at forming personal connections myself. I'm much better with linguistic theory than actual relationships. I find that hard to believe. You've made me feel more understood in the past few minutes than most beings manage in months. The sincerity in his voice made Neera's chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Maybe we're both just good at recognizing kindred spirits. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of shared understanding settling between them. Would you? Kex began, then stopped himself. I'm sorry, I don't want to impose, but would you perhaps be interested in continuing this conversation sometime? I don't often meet beings who view emotional expression as something other than a character flaw. I'd like that very much, Neera replied, surprised by how much she meant it. I'm usually here most evenings around this time, if you'd like to make it a regular thing. A regular thing, Kex repeated, as if testing the words. I haven't had a regular thing with another being in, well, longer than I care to admit. Then we'll have to remedy that, Neera said with a smile that seemed to light up Kex's entire face. Over the following weeks, their evening conversations in the library became the highlight of both their days. Kex would arrive with questions about human emotional expression, while Neera brought curiosities about Valdorian culture. But their discussions quickly evolved beyond academic interest. Do you miss it? Neera asked one evening as they sat in their usual spot. Your homeworld, I mean. Kex considered the question while absently arranging the data tablets scattered across their table. I miss the beauty of it. The crystal formations, the way light refracts differently through our atmosphere. But I don't miss feeling like an outsider in my own society. I understand that feeling more than you might think, Neera admitted. Earth is beautiful too, but I always felt like I was watching life happen rather than participating in it. And now? Now I feel like I'm finally having conversations that matter. Like I'm connecting with someone who understands what it's like to be different. Kex's crystalline features seemed to glow slightly in the soft library lighting. I've never had a friend before. Not really. Valdorians don't typically form emotional bonds outside of formal partnerships or family units. Well, you have one now, Neera said softly. If you want one. I want one, Kex replied, his voice carrying an intensity that made her heart skip. More than I've wanted anything in a very long time. Their friendship deepened with each passing day. Kex began to smile more, his rigid Valdorian posture relaxing into something more natural. Neera found herself looking forward to their evening meetings with an anticipation that surprised her. For the first time in her adult life, she felt truly understood by another being. It was during their fourth week of regular meetings that things shifted. You're different tonight, Neera observed as Kex settled into his usual chair. His typical crystalline composure seemed more fragile than usual. I received a communication from my family today, he said quietly. They've heard about my unconventional behavior here on the station. What kind of unconventional behavior? Apparently, expressing genuine concern for the well-being of other species is considered a serious psychological deviation. They're demanding I return home for corrective treatment. Nira felt a chill run through her. And will you? Kex was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the same nervous patterns she'd observed on their first meeting. I don't know. Part of me wonders if they're right. If there's something fundamentally wrong with me that needs to be fixed. Kex, look at me, Nira said firmly. When he raised his eyes to meet hers, she continued, there is absolutely nothing wrong with you. Your capacity for compassion, your emotional depth, your ability to connect with others, those aren't flaws to be corrected. They're gifts. But I'm not a proper Valdorian. Maybe being a proper Valdorian isn't what you're meant to be, Nira interrupted. Maybe you're meant to be something better. Something uniquely you. The hope that flickered in Kex's expression was painful to witness. Do you really believe that? I know it, Nira said, reaching across the table to place her hand over his. His skin was cool and smooth, like polished stone, but the warmth in his eyes more than made up for it. You've shown me what true friendship looks like. You've made me feel less alone in the universe. That's not the behavior of someone who needs to be fixed. Kex turned his hand palm up, intertwining their fingers. You've done the same for me. For the first time in my life, I feel like my emotions are a strength rather than a weakness. Then don't let them take that away from you, Nira said softly. Don't let them take you away from the being you're meant to be. As they sat there, hands joined across the library table, both of them realized that their friendship had evolved into something deeper. Something that neither of their species might fully understand, but that felt more real and meaningful than any conventional relationship either had experienced. I'm not going back, Kex said finally, his voice steady with newfound resolve. Whatever consequences come from that decision, they're worth it to stay true to who I am. And who you are is perfect, Nira replied, squeezing his hand gently. In the quiet sanctuary of the library, surrounded by the accumulated knowledge of dozens of species, two beings who had never fit their respective molds found something neither had expected, acceptance, understanding, and the beginning of a love that transcended species boundaries. The civilian dining sector of Nexus Point buzzed with activity during the evening meal shift. Beings from a dozen different species gathered around tables, the universal translator ensuring that conversations flowed across language barriers while the aroma of various cuisines created a symphony of scents that somehow worked in harmony. Tomas Vega stood behind the serving counter of Fusion, his small restaurant that had become unexpectedly popular among the station's diverse population. At 31, he had found his calling in creating dishes that appealed to multiple species' palates, no easy feat when dealing with beings whose digestive systems and taste preferences varied wildly. Order up, he called, sliding a plate of modified pasta across the pass. The Zolani customer who collected it gave him an appreciative nod before returning to her table. It was during the dinner rush 3 weeks ago that Tomas had first noticed her. She sat alone at a corner table, her delicate moth-like wings folded carefully behind her chair to avoid bumping into passing diners. Her compound eyes, large and multifaceted like polished emeralds, reflected the restaurant's warm lighting as she studied the menu with an intensity that suggested this was a momentous decision. Lumari were rare visitors to Nexus Point. Their homeworld was far from the major trade routes, and their species was known for being insular and traditionalist. But what had really caught Tomas's attention wasn't her species, it was the extraordinary beauty of her wing patterns. Where most Lumari he'd seen in cultural databases had wings with standard geometric patterns in muted colors, hers were a riot of swirling designs in brilliant purples, golds, and silver. The patterns seemed to shift and flow like living art, and when she moved, they caught the light in ways that made his breath catch. You're staring again, his sous chef, a pragmatic Terran named Rita, had whispered that first night. The pretty moth lady has been coming in for 3 weeks, and you've been making moon eyes at her the entire time. Tomas had denied it, of course, but Rita wasn't wrong. Every evening, Yuki Starweaver, he'd learned her name from the reservation system, arrived at precisely 1900 hours, ordered something simple, and ate alone while reading from a tablet. And every evening, Tomas found himself inventing reasons to emerge from the kitchen. Tonight was no different, except that Yuki looked more subdued than usual. Her wings, typically held with graceful poise, were tucked close to her body, and she barely touched her meal. During a brief lull in orders, Tomas made his decision. He prepared a small dessert, a delicate fruit tart that he designed specifically with Lamari dietary requirements in mind, and approached her table. "Excuse me," he said, setting the plate down carefully. "I noticed you seemed a bit down tonight. This is on the house." Yuki looked up at him with those remarkable compound eyes, and he caught a flash of surprise before she quickly looked away. "That's very kind, but I couldn't accept." "Please," Tomas interrupted gently. "I've been working on recipes that work for different species, and I'd value your opinion. Consider it a professional consultation." After a moment's hesitation, Yuki nodded. "If you're certain it won't be an imposition." "Not at all." Tomas found himself lingering beside her table. "I'm Tomas, by the way. Tomas Vega. I own this place." "Yuki Starweaver," she replied softly. "And this is?" She took a small bite of the tart, and her eyes widened slightly. "This is extraordinary. The flavor profile is perfectly balanced for Lamari taste receptors. How did you manage that?" "Research, trial and error, and maybe a little luck," Tomas admitted, pleased by her reaction. "I'm curious though, I don't often see Lamari on the station. What brings you to Nexus Point?" Yuki's wings rustled slightly, a motion he was beginning to recognize as nervous. "I'm a textile designer. I came here hoping to find new markets for my work, but..." She trailed off, looking uncertain. But I'm beginning to think I may have made a mistake." She gestured vaguely at her wings. "My designs are considered unconventional among my people. I thought perhaps other species might appreciate them differently, but I'm not sure I was right." Tomas stared at her in disbelief. "Unconventional? Your wing patterns are absolutely stunning. They're like living artwork." Yuki's compound eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him feel momentarily lightheaded. You think they're attractive?" "I think they're the most beautiful things I've ever seen," Tomas said honestly. "The way the colors flow together, the complexity of the patterns, it's breathtaking." For a moment, Yuki's wings fluttered with what he was learning to recognize as pleased surprise. Then she seemed to catch herself, and they folded tightly against her back again. "You're very kind," she said quietly. "But you don't understand. These patterns, they mark me as unsuitable for pairing among my people. No respectable Lamari male would consider bonding with someone whose wings display such chaotic designs." "Then Lamari males are idiots," Tomas said bluntly, earning him a startled laugh. "Perhaps," Yuki agreed, her expression brightening slightly. "Though I shouldn't speak so of my own species." "Why not, if they can't see what's right in front of them?" Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the restaurant's entrance. 3 Lamari had entered, 2 males and a female, their wings displaying the subtle, geometric patterns that Yuki had described as conventional. They were scanning the dining area with obvious disapproval. "Oh no," Yuki whispered, her wings pressing so tightly against her back that Tomas worried she might hurt herself. "I have to go." "Wait, what's wrong?" But Yuki was already standing, gathering her things with hurried movements. The 3 newcomers had spotted her and were approaching their table with expressions that radiated displeasure. "Yuki Starweaver," the older male said, his voice carrying the musical quality typical of Lamari but with an edge of censure. "We were told you might be found here." "Elder Thishan," Yuki replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't expect to see you on Nexus Point." Clearly, Thishan's gaze swept over Tomas dismissively before returning to Yuki. "Your family sent us to retrieve you. This foolish venture has gone on long enough." "I'm conducting legitimate business," Yuki began. "You're embarrassing our entire lineage," the female interrupted. "Flaunting those aberrant wing patterns among aliens, associating with." She looked at Tomas with obvious distaste, inappropriate companions. Tomas felt his temper flare. Excuse me, but I don't see how having dinner in my restaurant constitutes inappropriate behavior. You are human, Thishan stated as if that explained everything. Yuki comes from a respected family. She should not be consorting with beings so far beneath her station. Beneath her station? Tomas stepped closer to the Lamari elder, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. I think you should reconsider your tone. Tomas, please, Yuki said urgently, moving between them. Don't make this worse. How could I make it worse? These people are insulting both of us. Because you're not the one who has to live with the consequences, Yuki replied, her voice cracking slightly. If I cause a scene, if I bring more shame to my family. What shame? Tomas demanded. You're a brilliant artist with a unique gift. If they can't see that. They see exactly what they've always seen, Yuki interrupted, her wings trembling. A genetic aberration. A female whose wing patterns mark her as unfit for proper society. The pain in her voice hit Tomas like a physical blow. Around them, the restaurant had grown quiet as other diners sensed the tension. Yuki, Thishan said with forced patience, you will return with us now. Your family has been patient with this phase of yours, but it ends today. And if I refuse? Then you will be formally disowned. Cut off from all family support, your name struck from our genealogical records. You will become nobody. Yuki's compound eyes filled with what Tomas realized were tears, though they looked different from human tears, more like tiny prisms refracting the light. I understand, she whispered. Good. We leave in 1 hour. Use that time to collect your belongings. Thishan and his companions turned to go, but the elder paused to look back at Tomas. And you, human. Stay away from her. She is not for the likes of you. After they left, Yuki sank back into her chair as if all the strength had gone out of her. Her wings hung limply, the beautiful patterns seeming dimmed. I'm sorry, she said without looking at Tomas. I'm sorry you had to witness that. Don't apologize for their behavior, Tomas said, retaking his seat across from her. Yuki, you don't have to go with them. Don't I? She finally met his eyes. I have no resources of my own, no way to support myself. And more importantly, I have no right to drag you into this mess. What if I want to be dragged into it? You couldn't possibly understand what you'd be taking on. Associating with me would make you an outcast among Lamari society. And I. She gestured helplessly at herself, I'm damaged goods. My own people have made that clear. Your people are wrong, Tomas said firmly. You're not damaged. You're extraordinary. And anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve you. Pretty words, Yuki said sadly, but they don't change reality. I should go pack. She stood to leave, but Tomas caught her hand gently. What if there were another option? What do you mean? Stay. Not just on the station, stay with me. I make enough from the restaurant to support us both, and I could help you market your designs to other species who might appreciate them properly. Yuki stared at him as if he'd spoken in a language her translator couldn't process. You're suggesting I abandon my entire people, for you? For someone I've known for 3 weeks. I'm suggesting you choose the life you want instead of the life they're trying to force on you, Tomas corrected. The question is, what do you want, Yuki? For a long moment, she was silent, her compound eyes searching his face. I want to believe that someone could see beauty where my own people see only shame. I want to believe that these patterns on my wings are something to be celebrated rather than hidden. Then believe it. Because it's true. But what if you change your mind? What if you decide I'm too much trouble, too different, too beautiful, too talented, too kind? Tomas squeezed her hand gently. Yuki, the only thing I'm worried about is that you'll decide I'm not worth the risk. Tears continued to flow down her cheeks as she looked at him with something that might have been wonder. My family will never forgive me. Then we'll build a new family. One that appreciates you for who you are. Yuki's wings began to flutter, the gorgeous patterns catching the light as they spread slightly. I've never had anyone fight for me before. Well, you do now. She leaned across the table and kissed him softly, her lips tasting faintly of the fruit tart he'd brought her. When they broke apart, her wings were fully extended, displaying their full magnificent span for everyone in the restaurant to see. I'll stay, she whispered against his lips. I'll stay and we'll see what we can build together. Around them, the other diners began to applaud, humans, Zalani, even a few Zarathi joining in appreciation of the courage it had taken for both of them to choose love over convention. As Tomas wrapped his arms around Yuki, careful not to disturb her wings, he realized that some barriers were worth breaking. Some traditions were worth challenging. And some love was worth fighting for, regardless of what others might think. Together, he murmured, and felt her wings flutter with joy against his back. Together, she agreed, and for the first time since childhood, Yuki Starweaver felt truly beautiful.